Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're counting down my top 25 favorite songs of 2017. The best songs of 2017, at least in my own opinion. And I do want to stress that point that this list is entirely my own opinion. It's based off my own personal taste and what I happen to hear during 2017. So just because a song isn't on this list, that could just mean that, maybe I didn't like it quite enough to put on this list, because believe me, there were lots of great songs I had to not include on this list for the sake of keeping it to only 25. Or it could also mean that, maybe I didn't hear the song, and for that reason, of course, I couldn't include it here on this list. Now, just some other rules and guidelines for this list. Only one song per project is allowed here on this list, so that the list doesn't get filled up with a bunch of songs by the same artist from the same album or something like that. So if an artist happened to release multiple albums in 2017, they are allowed to have multiple songs on the list. They just have to be from different projects. Also, the song had to have been released in 2017 itself, meaning that, let's say it's a song from an album that was released earlier in 2017, but the song itself was released as a single in 2016 or something like that, it can't be included on this list. But on the other hand, that also means singles released towards the end of 2017 that maybe are going to be on albums coming up to be released in 2018, those songs are allowed to be on this list, as long as the song itself was released to the world sometime between January 1st of 2017 and December 31st of 2017. It could be on this list. And once again, it is just my own personal opinion based on songs that I heard this year. So I'm not saying that this is like objectively the best 25 songs of 2017 or anything like that. It's just my own personal taste. And with that said, I think we should just get started with my number 25 pick. This is definitely going to be a bit of a longer list here today, because it's 25 tracks. But I felt like any less than this would be leaving out some crucial songs that I really enjoyed this year. So let's get started with number 25. Coming in at number 25, we have Forever by Code Orange, the title track from their newest album released back earlier this year. And this is just a very aggressive metalcore song, which really, it kind of embodies that very aggressive, show no remorse kind of feel to it that I really like to hear at times in metal music and punk music, and of course when those two genres decide to meet in the form of metalcore music, which isn't a genre I'm particularly, into a ton of, I guess you could say. But when it's done in the style that Code Orange plays, especially on the newest album released earlier this year, I really like it. And I feel like this track just kind of embodies, the more straightforward metalcore, just aggressive side of this band. While that album overall showed a lot of experimentation at times, this is definitely one of the more straightforward, aggressive tracks. Yet I still really love it. And if you really want to get into this band and you need a song to kind of convince you whether or not they're right for you, this is definitely the song to check out, because it's a great tune and it's a very straightforward, rocking metalcore song. Coming in at number 24 on my list, we have Yeah Right by Vince Staples featuring Kendrick Lamar. Now, while I wasn't the biggest fan of the newest Vince Staples album, I enjoyed it overall, but it kind of disappointed me to an extent. There were a lot of cuts on that album, individual songs that I did really enjoy, and I found myself going back to throughout most of 2017 since the album's been released. And Yeah Right is probably one of the songs I've come back to the most. I really love the more aggressive feel that this song has to it. While the album itself had a very experimental feel to it at times, this song in particular goes for a very aggressive kind of experimental feel. That just goes very nicely with Vince Staples and Kendrick Lamar's rapping on the track itself. It ties together very nicely into this very experimental, aggressive hip hop track that is definitely worth checking out in my own opinion. Coming in at number 23 on my list, we have Gods of Violence by Creator from their newest album of the same name. Now this track, I really like how it kind of starts off a bit slower with some of the more acoustic instrumentation, kind of building a bit of atmosphere as the track opens up before it launches into the more melodic thrash metal style that Creator have kind of been excelling at in recent years. And really this track is just kind of the pinnacle of an album that I feel like is very consistent in terms of its quality. I could pick many tracks from this album that I think are very worthy of being on this list, but this one just happens to beat out some of the other ones just very slightly. And I think that build up in the intro is really what kind of sets up the perfect kind of mood for this track overall. The switch up from that more melodic intro to that aggression is something I really enjoy about the song. And the more aggressive parts later on are also very much worth your time listening to. It's just a really great Creator song overall, and it kind of proves why Creator have still remained one of my favorite thrash metal bands, despite, having put out albums for, a great many decades now. Next up on my list, we have Strobe Light by Gorillaz, featuring Peven Everett. I guess that's how you say his name. I'm not really familiar with his work, if you can't tell. But this track, though, I really love, of course, as it's making my top 25 favorite songs of 2017. I really love the more kind of smooth R&B kind of feel that this track sort of brings to it. And I did complain a fair bit about this new Gorillaz album and how just kind of thrown together it feels at times, how it kind of feels like, they're just kind of taking a lot of artists that Damon Albarn enjoys, I guess, and kind of throwing them onto one album. While it doesn't really make for the greatest album experience, it does make for some really great songs that we got out of it, including this one right here. And while this wasn't necessarily my favorite song on my initial few listens, even I think when I first reviewed the album, it's one of those tracks that have really stuck with me since this album's been released. And I just love the kind of smooth feel that goes through it, how kind of catchy it is. The bass through the song is really enjoyable. It's just a very solid track overall. It's a bit different from something that you would expect from Gorillaz, I feel. Something that they haven't really tapped into before, all too much, I would say, but it's a really enjoyable track overall. At number 21 on my list, we have Lamba by Brockhampton, the first of many Brockhampton songs that are going to appear on this list, but then again, that's what happens when you release several fantastic albums during the course of a year. Though this one doesn't actually come from one of the studio albums they released, this one is actually on the Demos collection that they dropped along with the final studio album they released in 2017. And there are two versions of this song. I'm specifically talking about the version that appears on that Demos collection, the extended version, if you will, of the song, not the video version that they released back in June, though I do enjoy that version. I don't think it's quite good enough to make this list. The extended, 9.5-minute version, on the other hand, definitely deserves a spot here on this list. And it is a song that you can't really get on normal streaming services or purchases through iTunes or something like that. It's only available with that exclusive Demos collection that they released. Though I guess if you try hard enough, you could probably find it somewhere on the internet. In this track, I just really love the feel of this song and the lyrics that kind of go with it. It's such a depressing, sad track, kind of talking about, the band members talking about moving away from their homes to form Brockhampton, this kind of group living together in the same house, unsure if they're going to make it in the music world. Now, of course, over the past half year, really, this group has blown up to be a massive name, really, and they're just still gaining even more success. But this track that was made during, the creation of their first album this year, Saturation, was made in a time where they weren't sure whether or not they were going to, get success or anything. For all they knew, the albums would have fallen on their faces, and they would have, been screwed pretty much. And this track really reflects that, the sadness of leaving home, the uncertainty, all those kind of feelings, and it puts them together against this very relaxed, very depressed at the same time, though, guitar, playing in the background. Kevin Abstract's hook is depressing yet catchy at the same time. And, it's a longer song for sure, but it definitely warrants its runtime with all the lyrical, just the great kind of depressing lyrics that kind of run throughout this thing, and just the overall feel of the track. It's a great song in my opinion, and I just love, just the overall atmosphere and lyrical content of this track. Next up on my list, we have Fortress by Queens of the Stone Age from their newest album, Villains. Now, I really like this track because, like many songs on that album, it incorporates a bit more synths into the mix, something that's not too typical for Queens of the Stone Age, but I really like how it's used here, kind of providing a bit of groove into this track that I really enjoy. I really like the hook on this track, how kind of, catchy it could be, yet at the same time the track doesn't necessarily, sound super upbeat or happy or anything quite like that. It's definitely a bit more depressing in terms of the actual mood of the song itself, but it still manages to be a very earwormy song that's very memorable, at least in my own opinion. Next up on my list, we have Phantom Limb by Guara, and this track, I really like how it manages to pull off, the very sad feel with the comedic edge of the band. I know that sounds like it makes very little sense, given, that Guara is definitely a more comedy-oriented metal band. But this track manages to pull off sad fairly well, in my opinion. Of course, this track kind of being a tribute to the late frontman of the band, Dave Brockie, or the character he portrayed, Oderus Urungus. But it manages to be both a sad track of kind of remembering these, both the real person and the character portrayed by the person. Yet at the same time, it doesn't necessarily step out of the Guara universe of characters and things of that sort. And of course, kind of reminiscing about killing people and things like that. Of course, in the characters of the Guara universe, that makes perfect sense. And it definitely just works as kind of like being a sad, reflective song told from the perspective of like the characters. But at the same time, it works at the same time being a reflection on the real person that was a major part of the band itself. And it just manages to play both sad and comedic at the same time, which really shouldn't work that well. It's definitely more of a sad song, I'll give it that. It's not, a laugh out loud funny track, but the fact that they managed to slip in so many things that make it so Guar, like in terms of like the style, it just makes the track really stand out in my own opinion as being one of the more memorable metal tracks I heard this year. Next up on my list, we have Bottom of the Ocean by Blink-182. Now, while California's deluxe edition release it got earlier this year wasn't, the great album that I think maybe Blink-182 needed following the very disappointing, regular release of California, there were a couple really great tracks on that deluxe edition that I enjoyed. Bottom of the Ocean topping those to be my favorite track from that project. I just really like the darker feel that this track kind of has running through it. Of course, Blink-182 aren't exactly known for being a dark band by any means, but this track goes for a bit of a darker sound that I really enjoy. I really like the chorus of this track, how kind of catchy it is. Something that, on the other hand, isn't particularly foreign to Blink-182, having catchy choruses, but it works very well with this track overall, creating a sort of darker atmosphere while maintaining its catchy, more pop sensibility that I do really enjoy. And I just wish more tracks from both the regular and deluxe edition of California fell into a similar vein as this track, because if that was the case, we might have gotten a really great album from Blink-182, but instead, we've got a couple of great tracks amongst a lot of filler, in my opinion. But this track is definitely one that you need to check out, because it's easily the best song that the band have put together in a long time, to say the least. Next up on my list, we have Beyond Oblivion by Trivium from their newest album, The Sin and the Sentence. And this track, one of the major reasons why I really dig this track is just the hook of this song, how catchy it is. While most of the track's verses go for a more aggressive feel to them, after the more aggressive vocals that kind of finish up when the hook comes in, you have the clean vocals come in, and it just has this very bombastic, very massive chorus to it that is very, earwormy, gets stuck in my head easily, yet at the same time has a very aggressive and powerful feel to it overall that I just really enjoy. And while, the structure of the track going from the more aggressive verses to the more clean-sung hook isn't necessarily something that's, foreign to metalcore, especially melodic metalcore, it works very well here in its execution. And just for how long this hook has been stuck in my head since, first hearing it a couple months ago, it definitely deserves a place on this list. Next up on my list, we have XXX by Kendrick Lamar featuring U2. Definitely a combination that I didn't expect a ton from when I saw the track listing for Damn months ago. How is Kendrick really gonna add U2 to his sound? It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. But hearing this track, for real, makes for probably my favorite track on Damn, of course, as it is here on this list. I really love the darker feel that this track goes for overall, kind of Kendrick talking about violence, gun violence particularly on this track. I love how he kind of has a bit more of a sorrowful feel here, and then it'll just switch up to a very aggressive as the beat kind of changes up and you have those sirens come in. I love that switch up there, and it just adds so much aggression to this track that is very needed here on the song. And U2's part being added in there is also very nice. I like how Kendrick somehow managed to incorporate them into a song. I'm guessing at this point Kendrick can incorporate any artist into his song if he could do U2, because it just works pretty well in my opinion, this combination. It doesn't overuse U2, but they're just there enough that that they're a featured artist, but they don't overstay their welcome, and they simply add to the track instead of detracting from this track that, for the most part, I feel Kendrick definitely has the best parts of, between, his verses, lyrical subject matter, and that beat switch up, especially when those sirens come in. It's just awesome, man. Next up on my list, we have Black Rain by Creeper. This song is just, easily one of the most standout tracks from their newest album, Eternity in Your Arms, the first album from this band. And it definitely stood out to me, especially going through this album on first listen, being new to this group. It stood out as being one of the highlights, and it still is probably my favorite track on the album. It kind of goes for that more pop-punk oriented feel with more, not exactly upbeat, but more energy-filled verses. Then you have a very massive, earwormy chorus that is very enjoyable. And I especially love how they not only have their normal lead singer in there, but they also have the female singer that occasionally does vocals in the band, kind of having backing vocals during the chorus. I really love it when bands have multiple vocalists going on. So I especially love this track and this chorus in particular for that reason. It's incredibly catchy, this song. And the verses manage to maintain that sort of pop-punk energy, but at the same time, it doesn't fall into the same cliches and things I really dislike about modern pop-punk music that allows me to really enjoy this track, and it definitely secures Creeper as being one of the bands that you need to look out for in terms of modern pop-punk in 2017, 2018 going forward, because I feel like this band is definitely going to do big things. The next song on my list is Forward by Tyler, the Creator, featuring Rex Orange County. Now, picking a song from Tyler's newest album, Flower Boy, was pretty difficult for me to do. Even though I've never been the biggest fan of Tyler, the Creator in the past, his new album really wowed me, and it's just grown on me even more since its release. And it's such a consistent album as well that picking one track in particular to really stand out was difficult for me to do. But I ultimately decided to go with the opening song on the album, Forward, just because I feel like it's not only a great song in its own right, but also a great opening song for an album, particularly Flower Boy, in terms of its lyrical subject matter and what it manages to accomplish. Just right from the get-go on the track, Tyler's kind of talking about, how much stuff he could have before he kind of gets tired of it and bored of it, how much land he could have before he wants more, and things of that sort, if I'm recalling correctly. He just kind of goes on, and it ultimately kind of lets you into the idea that Tyler's kind of lonely, even depressed, even here on this album. And these are all themes that are explored in a lot more detail in other tracks on the album. But I just really love how this track just instantly, right from the start, sets you up for these subject matters, these topics to be discussed in more detail as the album goes on. The way he structures this opening verse with just the way he kind of goes about it, kind of like I was explaining before, I really enjoy. I think it's a nice way to kind of set up the album and its ideas. The hook provided by Rex Orange County is very nice as well, and the more sad, melancholy, yet kind of laid-back feel of the beat also goes perfectly with the overall sound of the album and introduces you to that sound right from the start as well, which I really like. I'm always a fan of when an album can pull off a great album opener that manages to encompass all the kind of feels and sounds that the album is going to, let you in on more detail later on in the project itself. And that's why I really like this track, because it manages to kind of give you a taste of what you're going to be getting later on the album in this one track, yet at the same time it maintains an identity of its own. And for that reason, I think it's probably my favorite song on that album. And, not only just the song, but the album is also one that you need to really check out. Coming in at number 13 on my list, we have Subinstein, my sub 4, by Big Crit. Now, Big Crit's another artist I only got into earlier this year with his newest album, but this track, man, this track just goes so hard, and that's why it's here on this list. I love the bass on this track, I love the hook on this track, I love the kind of switch up that occurs later on in the track, and it becomes a bit more smooth sounding overall. It's just really well executed in my opinion. It's just such a good, song to get pumped up to. The hook, like I said, is just a monster of a hook, and the bass throughout this thing, of course, if you couldn't tell by the song title, is going to be pretty crazy. And I like the whole kind of, concept of the song about the sub coming alive, kind of like Frankenstein. It's a unique concept, especially given that the song was released along with the album around Halloween time. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was pretty cool in that regard. And I especially just kind of like how it doesn't take itself all too seriously, and it allows this track to be just a ton of fun as well. It's one of my favorite hip-hop songs of the year, and if you need something that just goes really hard, this song needs to be on your radar. Next up on my list, we have Run by the Foo Fighters. While their newest album was a pretty big disappointment to me, see my 10 most disappointing albums of the year video if you want more details on that. But one thing I did mention, both in my initial review of this thing and in that list video, was that the 2 lead singles from the project, this song and The Sky's a Neighborhood, were really great, and 2 songs I still really come back to. Though if there's one I preferred out of those 2, it would be Run, the lead single. The first time I heard this thing, I knew that I was, really in love with this song. I love how it has those very aggressive verses that are very reminiscent of some older Foo Fighters songs, maybe like White Limo, or songs like from their first album, for example. I have more of that grungy, sort of aggressive sound to them that isn't something that you get a ton of at times in more modern Foo Fighters music, but it does manage to work out well here on this track. And then it manages to nicely transition from those very aggressive verses into the smoother, more melodic choruses that I think works really well in my opinion. I just love how it manages to switch back and forth between this very aggressive Foo Fighters sound that we haven't gotten all too much of in recent years, and then goes back into that more melodic, catchy, chorus kind of oriented sound that is more modern Foo Fighters. And in that regard, it has a very it covers all the major grounds that a Foo Fighter fan could ask for. And given that the Foo Fighters are my favorite band of all time, of course I'm going to like this song, because it just manages to it covers all that ground really that I enjoy. Definitely a great song, and one that you need to check out. Next up on my list, we have Bleached by Brockhampton. See, told you there was going to be more Brockhampton on here, and we're not even done with them. But this track being my favorite song from their newest album, Saturation 3, I really like the more kind of sad feel that this track has. The hook that's provided by guest featured artist Ryan Beatty, who apparently is like some former radio Disney star that just kind of fell off the face of the earth for a period of time, then came back to appear on like Brockhampton's music. I don't even know how that came to be, but I guess it was genius, because I really like the hook here on this track. It goes nicely with the more depressed feel of the song overall. The verses provided by all the members in the band are just great as well. They all kind of have that more introspective feel to them that works very nicely against this more sad sounding beat. And then later on in the track, as it kind of adds that guitar in and Job's part begins, you could definitely tell that the track is going to move in another interesting direction. And during this outro, where everything's going a bit crazy, you have Bareface's vocals being added in there as well. And it's just a monster of a track in my opinion, and easily the highlight of Saturation 3. Next up on my list, we have Sweat by the All-American Rejects. This song being one of 2 songs that they released back in 2017, the other being Close Your Eyes, which I also enjoyed, but Sweat was easily my favorite of the 2 tracks. Just given that we haven't had any new All-American Rejects material in a while, in fact we're still waiting now for that new album from them to drop, hopefully sometime this year, Sweat was definitely a good track, along with its other companion, Close Your Eyes, and holding fans over for a little bit. I just really like the more kind of fun feel that this track has going for it. It doesn't feel like it takes itself all too seriously. It's a bit reminiscent of the sound that they had on Kids in the Street, which while I know many fans weren't a big fan of that album, I happen to really like that album, and I think it's probably one of my favorite of theirs, and it's one that has still stuck with me after, it's been released for a good few years now. And this track, I kind of like how it has that similar feel to it as well. Definitely goes for a more mature feel than some of their earlier pop-punk material. And the guitar solo on this thing as well is just great as well. I really love how it kind of, maintains that more rock edge to it, but still doesn't get all too crazy or feel all that disjointed from the rest of the track, which once again kind of has more of that Kids in the Street, kind of 80s even inspired feel to it, which I also really enjoy. And also, make sure you check out the music video that goes along with this track and Close Your Eyes. It's kind of like this mini movie of sorts that kind of tells a story with these 2 songs. It's definitely worth a watch if you're an All-American Rejects fan. But this song, if you had to pick between one of the 2 of the new ones, I would say this is the better of the 2. Yet, not by much by any means, but yeah, it's a great song. Coming in at number 9 on my list, we have Fake Happy by Paramore. And while, Paramore's new album is filled with many sad lyrics, compared over very happy sounding instrumentals and delivery, none really take the cake more than Fake Happy in my opinion, just because, they're kind of talking here on this track about, being fake happy, kind of portraying yourself as being a happy person, despite the fact that you're really not a happy person. And it kind of seems to insinuate that, despite the fact that the narrator kind of feels this way, that they're kind of aware at the same time that probably much of the people around them, many of the people that they see every day in their normal lives, also kind of feel the same way and are also very fake happy. But the thing is, you can't really tell just given the fact that, they're kind of portraying themselves as happy, but you really can't tell that just by looking at them. And I like the very upbeat sort of feel that the instrumental has, and how that's kind of, used against the very depressing lyrics. That's something that could be said about pretty much all the tracks on this new album that they released. But this track in particular, I feel like gets it right the most, especially when you added that more sad-sounding opening part of the song before it transitions into the happier-sounding instrumental. You definitely get the feeling that something isn't quite right here, despite the very happy-sounding instrumental that's going on here in this track. And it's definitely one that you need to check out. Coming in at number 8 on my list, we have One More Light by Linkin Park. And while I still kind of stand by the fact that this thing, the album as a whole, that they put out this year was just really average in my opinion, easily my least favorite Linkin Park album to date, coming from a hardcore Linkin Park fan. This track in particular is one that I do really like, despite my mixed feelings on the album overall. And that's only, especially given the death of Chester Bennington, unfortunately, especially, listening to this song after his death. Initially, this track was written for apparently someone at the label that they were working at or something who passed away, and that's who it was intended to be written about. Then they also performed the track in honor of Chris Cornell's death, also earlier this year, unfortunately. In the live performance of them, I forgot exactly what show it was on. It was one of those talk shows, I forgot which one exactly, but the live performance where they're performing this is just something else in my opinion. If I could put that version of the track on here, I would, but I don't think that version of the track has like an official release, anything. But you could definitely find it on YouTube if you search. But yeah, it's really a chilling song in my opinion, especially now that unfortunately Chester has passed away. It's a rather creepy listen. It's not a song I could listen to all the time or anything. It's definitely not a song that you just play on repeat because it's so much fun to listen to or anything like that. It's more of a depressing track, of course talking about death, and just, given the circumstances and everything, it definitely does stand out as being one of the more memorable moments on that project. And the very simple instrumental that the lyrics are over allows you to focus on the lyrics and delivery of the lyrics on this track more so than the instrumental or anything like that sort. While the instrumental isn't exactly going crazy or doing anything with, crazy annoying drops like some of the songs on that album were. The track overall, it's a bit difficult to talk about, in my opinion, at least why I like it, but, just given all that's happened, it's definitely a more reflective track, definitely a more sad track, and yeah, rest in peace, Chester Bennington. Coming in at number 7 on my list, we have A Plea for Understanding from Pallbearer, the closing track on their newest album. And, like many of the tracks on this album, this track kind of, takes the sort of doom metal sound of the band and incorporates a lot of emotion into the lyrics and the delivery of these lyrics to make a very memorable track, in my opinion. Especially how the instrumentals manage to kind of go nicely with the delivery of these lyrics and the very sad nature of the lyrics themselves. It works very nicely. And though this track is a rather long one, being over 10 minutes long, it doesn't have a boring minute to it, and though it moves slowly, of course, given that it's, doom metal as you might expect, the emotional punch that this track gives makes it all worthwhile, in my opinion. Next up on my list, we have Chase Me by Danger Mouse featuring Run the Jewels and Big Boy. Of course, when I found out about this collaboration's existence, I definitely needed to check it out, given that I'm a massive fan of Run the Jewels and Outkast, so this was definitely up my alley in terms of the artist provided here. Now this track comes from the soundtrack to Baby Driver, a film that I haven't seen actually, so I can't really say anything about the film itself or this song's incorporation in the movie, if it's even in the movie at all. I assume it is because it's in the soundtrack, but whatever, I'm just talking about the song itself here. I really love the beat of this track, how it kind of has a more guitar-driven sound to it. It sounds very nicely, and all three rappers sound great over the instrumental itself. It's definitely something different than any of these, three would, I guess, normally be over, but that's kind of a good thing about the track. Danger Mouse's production, it's different from the production they normally be on, but it still works nicely with the three artists featured, making this track something kind of memorable in its own right. And all three verses provided are great. And it's definitely not the only time that these three rappers have collaborated on a track before, but it's definitely the most memorable instance of all three of them being together on a track, in my opinion. It's just a fantastic song, a fantastic collaboration between some of my favorites, and for that reason, it's something that I've been coming back to a lot throughout the year. Coming in at number 5 on my list, we have Liability by Lorde. Now this song is just, sad. I feel like that's the one word that perfectly describes this song, is just sad. It's just a simple kind of ballad track where she's kind of talking about the whole breakup kind of idea of the album itself that it comes from. And this track in particular deals with kind of being lonely, not being able to be in relationships just because, of reasons, how, life, even what's going on in your life kind of, gets in the way of things, and you just kind of end up alone in the end. That's kind of the feel I get from this track. And her delivery here on this track just really sells it as well. How you just get this very depressed sounding Lorde feel to it that I think works really well. It's easily one of the most depressing songs I've heard this year, yet also one of the best. And once again, it's not a song exactly that you're going to be hitting repeat on repeatedly just because it's so much fun to listen to, but especially listening to it in the context of the record itself, it's definitely a nice gut punch that you need when listening to this thing to really hammer home the whole sad breakup idea. It's not just your typical generic breakup song or anything like that. There's a lot more substance to the lyrics that is something I really enjoy. Next up on my list, we have Junkie by Brockhampton from their second album they released in 2017, Saturation 2. Now this track, it's just one of the hardest going songs I've heard this year. And it definitely takes a darker turn as well in terms of not only its subject matter, but the beat as well. The beat on this thing just has a very dark, kind of frantic feel to it. You just kind of feel like something is off when listening to this song, but in a good way. And the verses and just the delivery of the verses goes very nice with it. You have Kevin Abstract on this track delivering probably one of my favorite verses from him, kind of talking about being gay, of course, something that's not quite the commonplace in the hip-hop community. And here, of course, like I said, this is a very aggressive track. He kind of takes a very aggressive approach to it, kind of talking about his place in the hip-hop kind of world as a result of, not only his success in Brockhampton, that, of course, at this time was just gaining traction and has kind of continued to do so since then, but also, of course, being a gay rapper in that as well, and it's pulled off very nicely. The transition between his verse and Amir's verse that comes after is also really cool, how it just kind of, the track just kind of cuts out, and how you have this really weird sounding, just kind of distorted, dark sounding transition between the two before Amir's verse starts is great. I also love Matt Champion's verse on this track where he's talking about respecting women. Another thing that's not super common in hip-hop, but here he just goes off, and there's really no other way to describe it. He kind of threatens, he tells you better hope that his aim is off when he's coming for you if you don't respect women, because, yeah, he's just that angry with you. And I love how Joba's kind of verses kind of cuts into his a bit here at times, and this track just goes so hard. I love the darker feel to it as well. The subject matter definitely backs it up. It's just easily one of the best tracks that they put out this year. Though maybe not quite the best, to be continued in a couple spots on this list, maybe. Next up on my list, we have another track that falls under the emotionally impactful doom metal category, only this time it's brought to us by Elder in the form of their track Blind from their newest studio album, Reflections of a Floating World. And like the Pallbearer track I was talking about before, the reasons why I really like this track are pretty much the same as the last one. Only I like this one maybe just a bit more. I love how this track, once again, despite being over 13 minutes long, doesn't waste a single minute or even second of its runtime on filler or anything like that. It's just, perfectly executed. I love the more emotional kind of side of this doom metal music that they've managed to pull out, not only in their album itself, but particularly on this track. I love the sort of feels that you get while listening to this thing. I love the guitar tone just running throughout this album, especially on this track. It's easily one of my favorite metal songs of 2017, but maybe not quite my favorite. Because my favorite would have to go to Mastodon's Jaguar God. Just what to say about this song, really. Of course, I'm a pretty big Mastodon fan. I don't think that's any secret. I reviewed all their albums earlier this year. But this song in particular, the closer to their newest album, Emperor of Sand, I love it for a variety of reasons. For one thing, I'm a big fan of, long, epic closer tracks. And it's definitely not the only one Mastodon have done. Probably not even my favorite one that they've done. But definitely stands out as being a great one. I love how it starts off slower with the acoustics. And then it just kind of builds up into a more, I guess, typical sounding progressive metal Mastodon song towards the middle. And then towards the end you have a bit of aggression thrown in there as well, before it exits out on this really epic, awesome guitar solo. That's just a nice way to end the project overall. Then another reason why I love this song is just the lyrics and the subject matter. Of course, Emperor of Sand, the entire album kind of being about the band members dealing with cancer. Not themselves particularly, but with people in their own lives that they know dealing with cancer, and this album is kind of their reaction to that, telling a story here that kind of parallels, cancer patients and their treatments and things of that sort. And Jaguar God is kind of, the character here in the story, kind of accepting death, I feel, because it starts off very melancholy, and then of course later on, of course the lyrics in the track are kind of like, it's right in front of me, your malignancy, of course, kind of being a reference to cancer itself, and that's kind of like the last lyrics you hear here before it exits to that guitar solo that I said was really epic before. It's just a really cool way to exit this album on its own, but when you add in that extra emotional kind of aspect of the whole cancer thing, given that I've dealt with cancer in my own life, not myself, but with people in my own life, like the band members themselves, I can definitely see where they're coming from with the lyrics here on this track. And for that reason, I'm not only able to really appreciate this album as a whole, but particularly this last track and just what it represents in the context of the album as a whole. I really love this song, if you couldn't already tell. It's a great closer, and I'm a sucker for long, emotional closers, and this track falls right into that category in my opinion, so it's no surprise that's number 2 on my list. But what could be number 1? Number 1 on my list, Milk by Brockhampton, from their first album that they released last year in 2017, Saturation. And what to say about this song, really? Of course, this is now the 4th time I'm talking about this group on my list, but with good reason, of course. They did put out a ton of phenomenal material in 2017, but I feel like this is easily not only my favorite song of the year and my favorite Brockhampton track of the year, but probably one of my favorite tracks I've heard in a while. And while it didn't really stand out to me on my initial listens, it's only grown on me even more with time. I really love the more sad feel. It kind of has a similar lyrical subject matter to Lamb that I was talking about way back earlier on the list, kind of dealing with the band, kind of dealing with this new lifestyle of kind of living, together as a group, trying to make music, trying to make it in the music world. Their insecurities that result from this. You have, for example, Kevin Abstract on a track on his verse talking about being lonely, just wanting people to hang out with, for example, on the hook of the track. It just definitely has a lot of loneliness to it. You have Merlin here on the track talking about dropping out of school, name-dropping himself, of course, instantly making it a Brockhampton classic. It's not a great Brockhampton song until Merlin says his own name, of course. But here, of course, he goes for a more emotional approach than most of his typical verses, which I really like, talking about dropping out of school and how, moving out to California and what must go along with that. Of course, that's something that you would imagine would be very, stressful. I love Amir's kind of short verse that you have here at the beginning, kind of talking about how he's changed as a person. Matt Champion's part, even though it's not exactly like a very in-depth verse or anything like that, he really just kind of repeats a similar idea over and over. It does really kind of hammer home the point of saturation. Like, I feel the first album and what Brockhampton must have been feeling at that time, how they just want to be someone someday, and how they're just kind of pretty much giving up everything that they have on this one dream of theirs, and they're just hoping that it's going to end up working out for them. Of course, it's a very positive thing to kind of look back on now, given that it did work out for them, that they're just blowing up now. But when they were actually recording this song, they didn't know that was going to be the case. And Dom's just outro part here, it's almost spoken word with how he's delivering his verse here, and how he feels here on this track, and it's just fantastic overall. This track, every verse here on the song, and the hook as well, phenomenal lyrics, phenomenal delivery, phenomenal subject matter. It's just, wow, it just knocks it out of the park in my opinion. The sad beat goes along perfectly with it, And, you know, while Brockhampton aren't strangers to having, you know, more emotional-based music, in fact, I feel like that's one of the major draw points to this group. This track in particular, I feel like, is the strongest of those songs. And not just those songs, but of any Brockhampton song that they put out ever. It's probably my favorite Brockhampton song, my favorite song from the Saturation Trilogy, my favorite song of 2017, and just a fantastic song overall. If you haven't heard of this group or any of their music before, but you're a fan of more alternative hip-hop, more introspective hip-hop, or just something that's sad that you want to listen to, make sure you give this song a listen, because it is perfect for all of those things, and it's on #1 on my list for a reason. So make sure you check it out. And that wraps everything up, folks. Those were my top 25 songs of 2017. I know it was a bit of a longer list than usual, but I think it was worth it because I feel like all these songs were worth talking about, and they're all worth your time, so make sure you check them all out. And in fact, to make things easier for you, I actually made a playlist in Spotify, linked in the description down below, that has all 25 of these songs with the exception of Lamb, because it's not available on Spotify. So that one you'll have to find on your own, I guess, if you don't already own it. But yeah, the other 24 you could, you know, listen to on Spotify. I made that playlist, so you could check all those out. And there's another playlist linked down below to another Spotify playlist, which has, you know, just a general list of some of my favorite songs of 2017. Not only the top 25 here, but, you know, I guess what you would consider my honorable mentions. It doesn't follow the one song per project rule. It's just a general collection of songs that I really dug this year. So if you like these picks, make sure you check out that playlist as well. And if you also enjoyed this video, make sure you check out the other link I have in the description. I know it's the third one I brought up now, to the playlist here on this channel, which has all my year-end countdown list, as well as all the lists I've done on this channel in general. And subscribe so you don't miss out on my future year-end lists that are coming out soon. Like I said, best albums of the year is right around the corner. So yeah, thanks a lot, guys. Make sure you subscribe, like I said. Comment down below what were some of your favorite songs of the year. And stay golden.